Welcome to NFL Daily, where we'll always call it Joe Robbie Stadium. I am Gregg Rosenthal here on a Thursday night. Yes, we're live on YouTube. Welcome. And to everyone else who's not watching, I'm with Bill Barnwell in a game that was well decided before the biggest thing to happen in this game happened. The Bills win easily in Miami, 31-10, Bill. And normally I'd be screaming and yelling and getting into the football of it all, but we got to start with Tua Tagovailoa, who left this game in the third quarter with a concussion and quickly ruled out of the game. It was a scary hit on the field. It's tough to even know where to go with this, Bill, in terms of analysis, but it was one of those moments that takes your breath away, unfortunately, and felt familiar.
Yeah, I think the tough part for me is, you could see what was happening, right? Like, it wasn't as if this was a random play in a random moment in a game where nothing could have been anticipated and nothing could happen. Like, clearly this was a game where the Dolphins were struggling. Tua was struggling. He'd already thrown 3 interceptions, including a pick 6. And clearly he wanted to make a play, right? Like, he wanted to do something for his team. He wanted to go above and beyond. And it just is unfortunate and sad to see that led to, him taking an unnecessary hit on a play where he probably could have slid and got a first down. I'm not criticizing Tua here. Like, I'm saying basically, like, the circumstances of the game, I think, led Tua to do something that in a different situation he would have been smarter about. And that is unfortunate because, the Dolphins and Tua, like, his history is well known. The impact of the injury on the Dolphins is significant, but the impact on the injury on Tua is significant. I mean, this is a player who, there were serious questions about the future of his career a couple years ago. I'm very happy he was able to stay healthy last year, very happy he got paid this offseason, but obviously, just a heartbreaking injury for Tua, for Dolphins fans, for fans of the league. Just one of those things where everyone just felt awful the moment it happened.
Right, and it reminds you so much of, the injury he had, the second one, which was, I believe, on a Thursday night football game 2 years ago in the 2022 season. So just to recap, this is the 4th known concussion that he's had since 2022. And he spoke before the 2023 season and said that earlier that offseason, especially in the wake of the concussion when he was out at the end of the 2022 season, that he considered retirement. And that stayed in my mind, and it definitely was something that I thought about when he got this contract extension. The NFL moves so quickly that contract feels like it was a long time ago, and it was just last month. It was in August where he gets $93 million guaranteed, maybe 160 depending on how you look at it. And Mike McDaniel signs a contract before this season, and we're taping this after the game. We're going to be looking to see what Mike McDaniel says at this point in the process. It's hard to imagine there's much of any specifics, but you do worry about a young man who obviously had questions bigger than football. Kaylee Hartung on Amazon, who did a good job throughout the night updating the audience, pointed out that he was ruled out 6 minutes after. Did say family was with him in the locker room. And you could see, Bill, Mike McDaniel and the look on his face. It was a very human moment when, first of all, when he kissed Tua on his way out, but also they had a shot on him. I don't know if you saw it. It was early in the fourth quarter, and the game's going on, and you could almost just read what was going on in his head, that he was already thinking ahead to what's next. And there's no point in guessing like how long this is going to be or anything like that. But obviously they're going to have to come up with some solutions in the short term and maybe in the medium term. And we'll see how long term it is for what they want to do at quarterback. It was Skylar Thompson tonight who won a backup battle. And that backup battle, which I was following pretty closely with Mike White in training camp, now looms a little larger just in my mind, because the word from their fans, from everyone that was tracking that, the reporters, were that both backups were really struggling and had a really poor training camp. And Thompson kind of won that job by default. And it was a short sample, but he struggled tonight too, as did Tua when he was on the field.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things come to mind for me. With the Tua injury, in the big picture, right? I mean, this was a situation where, like you said, the league moves so fast that I really think after 2023, after a successful season where he didn't take a lot of hits, he was very smart with the football. He gets the ball out so fast anyway. They'll talk about him doing jujitsu, practicing, taking hits, avoiding head injuries. I think there was this hope that, okay, like he had this scary thing happen to him in the past, but things are different now, right? Like he is a smarter player. He's going to be safer. No one's going to get mad at him if he doesn't take a hit or if he's protecting the football, protects himself. Like everyone's on board with that. We're hoping this is a thing of the past and that this is a smarter, safer Tua Tagovailoa moving forward. And I think this injury sort of poked a hole in that balloon, right? Like that is not the case anymore. Maybe that was naive. Maybe that was just hope as opposed to logic. But it did feel like, that feeling of, sort of Tua having moved past those injuries, unfortunately, is not the case. He's still going to be dealing with this.
I mean, it's one play. That's football. Like all these guys, no matter how safe you are, you're one play away. And you're right. I think it was such a good point to make because I hadn't really thought about that the situation of the game might have led a little bit to the desperation of that play. Just to situate it, it was 31-10 Bills. So this injury did not really have a material impact on the game. In fact, the score was the exact same as the final score. They were inside the 10-yard line. It's midway through the third quarter, and Tua's having a nightmare game. Now, the first two interceptions you could put on his receivers, and the lack of depth they have at wide receiver right now. The first one hits his receiver in the hands. It's maybe a little bit early, but it hit him in the hands. Good anticipation. Pops up in the air. The Bills get it. The second one, Robbie Chosen, who's newly joined to the team. Both the receivers who were involved in these plays weren't on the team in mid-August. It doesn't seem like Chosen runs the route that Tua expects. He sails it. And then the third interception was just a play that Tua was trying to throw the ball out of bounds, but he was under such pressure. His arm didn't get it there, and it was a really poor decision by him there. So it was a game where he obviously was not happy with how it was going because it was so similar to so many Bills games in the past that they put it up that they've lost 11 of 12. They've lost, to me, those don't matter as much as they've now lost 5 of 6 in the McDaniel era. And that to me is germane to this discussion, including a September game last season, when the Dolphins were undefeated and the Bills came in and waxed them. So we will get to the Bills side of it. It was a really important game for the Bills, and they did a fantastic job. So we will give their fans, and I know Eric, who's our producer, who's taking care of his 4-month-old baby behind the glass and is like quietly gleeful that the Bills had such an easy game. Like, have some class, Bills fans. And Eric, let's finish though the Tua discussion just from a practical standpoint. Al Michaels mentions that, Tua's got like the mini bye week to try to come back, and I'm just shaking my head here. It was not a good game for Al Michaels. I'm not sure this is the crew for Amazon. I just don't think I don't think they were up for it. Like, they didn't provide context when Tua was coming off the field. They asked really Hartung to do a lot of that. He compares it, says it's ironic that it's Damar Hamlin in the moment and all this stuff. And I'm thinking it's probably going to be more of a mini bye situation, but I couldn't help but look ahead just because you start thinking about like managing the season and what's going to be next. They're at Seattle in week 3. They're home for Tennessee in week 4, and they're at the Patriots in week 5. Then they have their bye week after that. So that's just a little bit of context of who's coming up next. Do we dare speculate about whether it could be anyone but Skylar Thompson here? Ryan Tannehill, Dolphins fans were hoping might be an option when this battle was going on. Skylar Thompson hasn't really progressed, I don't think, since his rookie year when he actually was surprisingly good and played pretty well against the Bills in the playoffs. There is a former Patriots quarterback that's out there that the Bills had to give up a draft pick because they once tried to sign during the season. I'm just saying, it's not that crazy. Their owner wanted him then. Is it that crazy, Bill Barnwell? Or am I getting way too ahead of myself? I
think you're getting a little ahead of yourself. And I would say, Greg, really, the thing that gets lost in the shuffle here with the Dolphins is they're already feeling the impact of the Tua signing. And I don't want to talk about what might happen with Tua down the line in terms of the contract. I don't think this is the time or place for that.
No.
But in terms of the roster they constructed around what was presumably going to be a healthy Tua this year. Think about the interceptions in this game. Like you said, the first two picks, two players who were not on the roster in mid-August. Fourth and fifth wide receivers behind the big two and Braxton Berrios, guys who are not making a lot of money because the Dolphins can't afford to spend a lot of money on their third, fourth, fifth receivers. The third interception comes into play where the left side of the line gets caved in. They're on a third string guard, I believe, after injuries, and of course they lost Robert Hunt to the Panthers this offseason in free agency. And then Teron Armstead, their very good left tackle, who has a significant track record of battling injuries himself, came out for that play to get a shoulder harness adjusted. He ended up leaving the game later on as well. That to me is sort of, even if you go out and get a Tannehill, even if you go out and get Mike White, even if Skylar Thompson does play better than he has in years past, this is a much more limited version of last year's team. And a team that is rebuilding on the offensive line, a team that has questions on defense with the pass rush. They were okay against Jacksonville in the second half, but inconsistent with the pass rush. The secondary is a work in progress. They have some, they have veterans there, but some changes there as well. I just have this sort of question about, even if, hopefully Tua is able to recover and come back relatively quickly, Greg, what we've seen from this team the first 2 weeks does not suggest they are, even close to what they were a year ago, let alone competitive to the point where you think they're taking a step forward. And, with a roster where you have guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Ramsey who are, exiting the prime of their careers.
Right. And that's a good point because, look, before the injury, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle were both very quiet in this game, and it's been an inconsistent passing attack, very different than the Dolphins, how they started last season, actually 2 seasons ago, too. Tyreek Hill finishes with only 3 catches for 24 yards. Waddle goes 4 for 41. Eric, let's throw up a question here from our YouTube viewers, but Cody Home asks, why were the Finns running so much? That's an interesting question. I think that was the plan coming into it. So I think they were effective running the ball. At halftime, they actually had 101 yards rushing on 20 carries. Midway through the third, before the Tua injury, they had 143 yards on 24 carries. So I think the plan tonight, and it goes to what you were saying, Bill, was they don't have a third receiver. Odell Beckham has not been healthy. I mean, they should have probably seen that coming. Last week, actually, they had 2 tailbacks on the field, whether it was a fullback or 2 running backs, because they had Mostert and Achane on the field at the same time. Over 50% of the time, I mean, they are right at the center of going heavier personnel and running and throwing out of it. They've had 2 tight ends on the field quite a bit. They had 2 running backs on the field. And I think they rightly were thinking that they could run the ball well against the Bills, and they did. The situation of the game just dictated that it got away from them. And when they were throwing the ball, the Bills didn't blitz. I have to recheck the stats, but they didn't blitz once in the first half. So they're just laying back. They're trying to prevent the big pass. And even without their linebackers, and they lost Terrell Bernard to a pectoral injury in this game, that is something to watch closely because they could be down there 2 really good linebackers, Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard, for a while if that's serious. They were able to make it work by trying to prevent the big play. So I don't fault the Dolphins for trying to run. They also lost Jeff Wilson actually late in this game, who had an oblique injury. And you mentioned Armstead. It was officially a shoulder injury. So just kind of a disaster for the Dolphins, who also, Mike McDaniel struggled with clock management in this game. There was a lot going on, to your point, to make them a little bit more worried than just the Tua injury.
Yeah, and Greg, during the broadcast, from what I saw, from what the announcers were saying, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but they said the Bills are playing a ton of 2 high shells, and that typically for teams means you're going to have an advantage in the box. You should be running the football, and so I do think, from their perspective, they were going to be a run-heavy team in this game because of how the Bills were coming out and defending. Like you said, the Bills were taking away the big plays. Something Sean McDermott defenses do extremely well historically is take away big plays, and they wanted them to run the ball. And the Dolphins were going to run the ball, and the Dolphins were running the ball pretty successfully. The only problem was they would end up in a third down situation and throw the ball, and it would lead to a sack or an interception. And so they fell behind because they gave the Bills a couple short fields. And then, like you said, once the game script changed, it was unfortunately, still a mess. But, even into that 2-minute drill, they were running the ball a ton, a lot of short passes. They weren't attempting stuff downfield because the Bills weren't giving them anything downfield. And that felt so much to me. The comparison I made on Twitter was, it felt like the Jimmy Garoppolo drives with Kyle Shanahan, where they did not trust Jimmy Garoppolo in those situations. They did not want to throw the ball downfield. They did not want to put it in tight spaces. Kind of felt like Mike McDaniel was doing the same thing in a situation where, for him, it was more important to deny the Bills another opportunity to score than it was to give the Dolphins the best possible chance of scoring a touchdown. And, it ended up kind of being lost in the shuffle. But like you said, this was a situation where, even the broadcast was criticizing the clock management for the Dolphins in that situation. It was not an impressive piece of work, and it led to a field goal, which is fine, but just a very curious series of decisions from the Dolphins, who seem very concerned about throwing the ball deep against, like you said, a Bills team that had injuries at linebacker. They're rebuilding its safety. It's not like this is a dominant Bills defense on paper.
No, and I have an advantage on you, Bill, and many of the rest of our industry now. I'm getting the next gen stats live. Apparently, I could have had this last year, and I didn't even realize it. But yeah, split safety. Tua was fine against it, 13 for 17, but only 103 yards in one of his picks. But that's a lot of throws. So they had the split safeties out there a lot of the way. And as I mentioned, it was Dolphins ball, 7-7, very late in the first quarter when he threw that second interception. Yeah. And after that point, it just felt like the Bills' offense was too big and tough, and they started just running it down their throats. And then when you were in a tough situation, Josh Allen just started doing Josh Allen things. It's been a bummer talking about this Tua thing. I mean, it's a bummer when we lose starting quarterbacks. This is the second primetime game that we've been talking about it. So let's feel good and let's listen to a positive highlight. Eric, give me your boy Josh Allen finding James Cook on a great running throw to set up a touchdown.
Samuel goes back and forth and gets set. Pass to the outside, wide open, inside the 10. And James Cook takes it in. A lot of eye candy there, a lot of motion, and finds the open man and the wide open man, as it turns out.
So that is 4th and 3. That's actually early in the first quarter. And the reason I wanted to point that out is that they went for it. It's first quarter, it's scoreless, and I noticed this last week, and I clocked it. In 2 situations last week where Sean McDermott traditionally was pretty conservative, they went for it. In a first half situation that was rather similar to that one, and they didn't get it. And then a second half situation where they did get it. And I'm like, hey, if they're going to lean into this offense, I love that Sean McDermott is kind of finding religion when it comes to going for it on 4th down. Because ultimately, as good as their defense is schematically and stuff, like, this is an offensive team, and they've been great on offense these first 2 weeks.
Wasn't he in Carolina when Ron Rivera underwent the greatest transformation in NFL history, from a coach who actually cost his team games to very briefly a marginally aggressive coach, and got about 8 years of jobs out of it? I mean, you have Josh Allen. Like, you have that guy who is going to be a difference maker, who's going to terrify opposing teams in short yardage. And on that play, Josh Allen didn't do much, but it was they called mesh. They just used some really cool motion to get some natural picks for the swing route, the rail route, I should say. And it's a perfect catch and throw, and James Cook is a absolutely great player for that situation. So as long as they have plays they feel good about, I mean, they should absolutely be a team that's aggressive on 4th down. And, this is not the same caliber of Bills team that I believe they've had in years past. This is a team that is in transition.
I might disagree with you there, buddy. I might disagree with you. I picked them to win the Super Bowl. I'm feeling good about it right now.
Wow. I picked them to win the AFC East. I felt like that was a pretty aggressive choice, but there's definitely positives here, right? Like, the running game looks good. The Von Miller looked kind of spry tonight for a guy who was pretty much anonymous last year. The secondary looks okay so far. I thought Arizona gave them a little more trouble than I would have liked, but I just feel like this is a team where the losing Stephon Diggs was their biggest story this offseason, and that was not going to be as impactful of a loss as maybe people made it out to be. I think some of the players they lost this offseason were out of their prime years. They were dealing with injuries a lot. I think moves that had to be made. And I do think this Bills team is better than the Dolphins on paper. I do think the Bills team is good enough to win the division. But of course, so much of that's going to come down to how healthy Josh Allen is for 17 games.
Right. I mean, you could say that about any great quarterback. And look, Josh Allen didn't have to do much tonight. 13 for 19 for 139 in the air with a touchdown because the running game got going and because they just turned the ball over on offense. On defense. But, the reason I went with him was, well, more just that it just seems so hard to 3P. And I just felt the team I'm going to pick an AFC team. There's too many good teams. And Josh Allen he's due like an MVP year. I mean, this is all like ridiculous things to talk about. But more, they reminded me of the 2022 Chiefs, where it's like you have the offensive line. I think this is the best offensive line of the Bills era with Josh Allen. I think this is the best coordinator and the best fit just right now for where they're at, that this can be a really good year. And that they have enough options. So Khalil Shakir tonight, their leading receiver again, 5 for 54. He only had to run 16 routes. So again, this was a strange game. But what I was talking about in the first half, when they needed to, they just kind of leaned on the Dolphins defense, which seemed to start getting tired. And Cook ends up going 11 for 78 and 2 touchdowns. Let's listen to one more play. It was actually a near touchdown, but it was Josh Allen being Josh Allen and setting up what ended up being a Cook touchdown.
Low snap. Dancing. Looking downfield. Firing downfield. Caught at the 2-yard line. They'll mark it at the 1-yard line. So Allen extends the play. Ty Johnson is the third down back. Normally stays in the block. Send him out in the pattern. Find him at the 1-yard line.
And yeah, if you're watching that play over again, you can see it's Jalen Ramsey on the play. He's been on the wrong side of a lot of negative plays through 2 weeks. Now, he missed camp, some injury concerns there right before he signed the contract. He wasn't even practicing, whether that was injury or contract related. Some people have different
he has a track record of maybe having mysterious back injuries.
Right. So some people have noticed, though, he has struggled these 2 weeks, but that was just a great rollout by Josh Allen on what was a 3rd and 12 when the game was still up for grabs to Ty Johnson. And yeah, they've been resourceful on offense. I'm glad you mentioned Von Miller, because I don't think we mentioned him on our show last week, that he had 5 or 6 pressures in that game last week. He had a couple nice moves. He didn't look like prime Von Miller, but he looked like a plus pass rusher, which he was so far away from being. And man, they could use another one with Gregg Rousseau. And tonight, not that I was watching Von Miller every single snap, but he looked fast as hell on that sack. So that is good for a team that has some negatives with injuries. I mentioned Bernard, and obviously Milano's gone, and you didn't have Teron Johnson. They've had some positives here from their veterans. Deion Dawkins, also their left tackle, has played very well through 2 weeks. So a lot to feel good about if you're a Bills fan.
Yeah, and really, on both sides tonight, it felt like the game plan was attacking the linebackers. For the Bills, there was a lot of the, throws out into the flats, some boots for Josh Allen, trying to get stuff on the edge. And then for the Dolphins, more of the tap passes, the reverses, the jet sweeps, trying to use their receivers in those roles, and using some, Achane in the flat quite a bit on some escort motion with those swing passes. But it felt like that was, both teams identified that as a weakness for the other team. And I think it was right for both teams. I think the Bills, obviously, without Milano and then losing Bernard early in the game, made sense to attack linebackers if you could. For the Dolphins, they attacked David Long in coverage. Seemed like they, I know Ramsey was in coverage on that big play, but it felt like they wanted to, attack the linebackers where they could. And so that, it feels like if there's a weakness for the Bills right now, if Bernard does miss time with a pectoral injury, you feel like that would be it. But they looked fine without Milano the first 2 weeks. So hopefully Sean McDermott, who has done a great job coaching linebackers in the past, can have them get by without Milano and Bernard for a stretch.
Yeah, they're down to it, though. They lost.
In week 2.
They lost the linebacker to Seattle in the offseason, and They do have Dorian Williams from Tulane University stepping in, and he's at least not stood out in a bad way.
AJ Klein is inevitably on this team at one point or another every single season.
I don't think AJ Klein's retired at this point. They do have a man, Balin Spector. Is AJ Klein retired? I don't know. Come back, AJ Klein. We would love to have you.
I suspect he'll come back. And Greg, the other thing I wanted to say about the quarterback situation, I just wanted to bring this up.
Okay.
The haves and have-nots in the NFL for backup quarterback feel really distinct, right? Where you have the Dolphins, where obviously you hope Tua doesn't get hurt. You don't know what's going to happen. But Skylar Thompson was a guy who, like you said, not playing well in camp, kind of won the job just because Mike White lost it. Look at the Green Bay injury. I mean, they had to trade for Malik Willis, a guy who's not been good as a pro quarterback and who looked absolutely abysmal in the 2 snaps he had, filling in for Jordan Love at the end of the game in Brazil. It's one of those things where that is a position we don't think about very much, but man, even if you have a Nick Foles caliber backup, that is a big difference between guys who are replacement level players. And so
it's why I overrate these quarterbacks, at least for what the money they make. Every year on my top 101 free agents, I always put Jameis Winston way higher, and then Jameis Winston gets like a 1-year, $3.5 million contract or whatever it is. He gets the equivalent of like a rotational defensive tackle. Yep. And yet the team that has just a somewhat capable backup, which I think he's even above that, like, sure, it's such an advantage. To me, it's always been, especially lately, it's been a problem. All right, let's look at one more comment from the audience here. Chris Green says they already have Mac Jones, or come get Zappy. Miami says Yumi. I mean that no. Where is Bailey Zappi?
I don't know.
Practice squad.
I don't know what the purpose of getting Bailey Zappi.
No, there's no point.
You might as well say to get Jay Cutler back in a Dolphins uniform.
Man, it is a depressing night because the people. I'm trying to look for comments maybe from Mike McDaniel. As we're taping it, it hasn't happened yet. And the reality is, like the Amazon post game crew, they're already talking about retirement. People are writing about retirement. I think this is a very personal decision for Tua Tagovailoa. It's just the night of the injury to me that it's very premature, but. The reality is everything's going to be on the table, and we will just have to see. It's an awkward night. And just from a brass tacks perspective, we'll remember the Tua injury, but it's also a very important night for the Bills who go to 2-0 and could really be in charge of this division once again. They've kind of owned the Dolphins the last few years. They beat them decisively twice last year, and that's how they won the division through tiebreak. And now they will have the early tiebreak over the Dolphins too. Okay, that's it for the game talk. But we're not done, Bill Barnwell. We are going to just talk a little bit about some predictions because there's nothing I love more than the navel gazing, Bill. And I thought it would be fun, just kind of as we wrap up the normal part of the week here on NFL Daily. We will be dropping our picks against the spread show on Friday afternoon. And so that's going to be a separate show. So for anyone that was looking for Cynthia Freeland and I's picks, we're picking 3 games against the spread every week. It's very quick, and that's going to come up in a separate show a little later. Although I did pick the Bills tonight, so I got that one right. But that wasn't part of that. We're going to go back and actually just quickly go through a few predictions that we made before the season even started. And you might say, we've just started week 2. We've only played 1 game each and 1 game in week 2. And yet I want to already see what's changed your mind. So what we're going to talk about, Bill, is a prediction we feel really good about after 1 week. A prediction we've already started to regret, which was really my inspiration for this segment, because there are a couple, but there's one that really stand out that I'm like, why did I do that? And then just for fun, a prediction I wish I made. So why don't we start with you? We'll go a prediction that you feel good about so far.
Prediction I feel good about? I predicted that the Giants were going to take a further step backwards and that they were going to be, if not the worst team in football, one of the worst teams in football. And from what I saw in week 1, things were not pretty. I mean, the offense was hopeless. They couldn't block. That's not true. They couldn't block in some plays. They were probably like a C- blocking. They were a D- for quarterback play. Malik Neighbors is already unfortunately battling a knee injury. He was limited in practice today. The defense looked totally, they made Sam Darnold look like the guy Sam Darnold believers have hoped he was going to be for about half a decade now. I mean, everything looked wrong for them at home, and not like the Vikings are a great football team in my eyes. So that's one where I feel pretty good about being skeptical of the Giants making a step in the right direction.
Well, I hope that you regret picking this as the prediction you feel good about on Sunday afternoon about 4:20 Eastern, because there was no game I had a harder time picking this weekend than Commanders-Giants, but I actually went Giants in the end because I just feel like I honestly think they're two of the three worst teams in the NFL right now. So I'm with you that I agree. If I just had to guess, I think the Panthers, Commanders, and Giants are the worst three teams. But the Giants are in year 3 of their program, and they just have better players. And I know Daniel Jones was a mess, but that Commanders defense, they could have given up 60 points to the Buccaneers. There were so many receivers just flying open, and they don't have a lot of talent on offense either. So I just kind of, maybe the vibes are enough for the Commanders to get a win. And that's why
that is the only thing I can think is the vibes.
Wait, I mean, both teams are bad. Don't get me wrong. Yes. I said it was the toughest game for me to pick all weekend. I wrestled back and forth, but I went with the Giants in the end because they do have a bunch of good players. So, and they're like year 3. I think they can maybe go get a road win and at least get to 1-1. But ultimately, I think that will be a prediction you feel good about. I'm not arguing with you about that. Okay, the prediction I feel good about was fading the Falcons. I will also the Bills winning the Super Bowl. It's a little early for that. I had Josh Allen MVP. Bills winning the Super Bowl as like a 3 or 4 seed. It just felt like that's how they'll finally do it. Okay, that feels good so far. But fading the Falcons was one of my strongest things all offseason. A lot of it was that Kirk Cousins was coming off a torn Achilles, and we should just not assume that that's nothing. And so far, we'll see, but that really looks like something. And that the rest of the team wasn't so great that like he's coming into a good situation, that they were more like about a 4 to 5 win roster that had a terrible schedule last year. And that I know they added talent on defense, but just there were questions all over the place that even if it was normal Kirk Cousins is pretty up and down. And I am very concerned about him after that week 1 performance, that he's going to take a while maybe to get going, and that the injury could really be an issue here early in the season or maybe throughout the season. So I'm feeling good about that prediction.
You should. I mean, that was a absolute mess. I mean, they were, I know ESPN Stats and Info had the numbers on them throwing 100% out of the time in the shotgun, or 100% of the time out of the shotgun.
Pistol,
yeah. And then, no, 100% throw out of the shotgun.
Oh, I got it.
82% run rate out of the pistol. So very distinct play calling based on where Kirk Cousins was standing. 0 play action snaps in the game. Kirk Cousins is, I believe, I had in my column, his slowest max speed of any game as a pro. I think Ben Solak had in his column, traveled the least distance by far he's ever traveled in a game in the next gen era. I mean, everything just tells you Kirk Cousins cannot walk at a high speed, let alone run. And
I hope that's wrong, because he's on Monday Night Football this week, and like
they get the Eagles.
I'm picking the Eagles. I want them to win and everything, but I just don't want it to be like this weird, sad thing with Kirk Cousins. All right, let's do the prediction that you already regret. So this is the centerpiece of this segment here. Like, what is something that you said that you actually are already like legitimately moving off? And if there's nothing, you could say nothing, but if you're just stretching to find one, tell me that.
It's a couple that come to mind for me. Thinking I will go with Blake Corum being the lead back with the Rams. And, I think at some point he's going to have a role. I think it's going to be injury dependent on Kyren Williams. But I just, over this offseason, I look back at like late round picks who hadn't had big rookie seasons, who got significant snaps in year 2 and what happened. And so often they got benched quicker than anybody expected. Like they were one and done in lead roles at running back. And then, Kyren Williams gets hurt during the offseason. He's dealing with a foot injury that he's had in the past. He gets put on punt return duty. I'm just like, man, Blake Corum might get 75% of the snaps week 1. Like he might just be the lead back to begin the season. And then Blake Corum got 0 offensive snaps in week 1.
Man, that was a small level prediction, because I have a feeling, Bill, actually, that's going to work out fine in the end. I think you were on the right track. I don't know if he's going to be the lead back now, but like it took a month for Kyren Williams to get the job last time. In fact, I believe there was some thought that when they had the injuries during the game on the offensive line, that they just prioritized pass protection in terms of their backs above all, even like Ronnie Rivers might not blow up in a big hole, but they can trust him in pass pro, and that you see with that with running backs. And maybe that will be an issue for a couple weeks, but I think it might have been situational. I have a much bigger regret than that.
Please.
A much bigger regret. So I don't know why I did this. Like I really leaned in at the very end. I like got convinced that the Cowboys were just going to be a total disaster. And I kind of bought into the whole everything was feeling negative, and maybe it will turn negative in the end, but it really only took one game of like, oh yeah, Dak Prescott is freaking awesome, and I know it wasn't his best game ever, but he's still freaking awesome. And Micah Parsons is a total beast, and they really seem like they have some answers defensively that I think will make up for a few of the lack of depth issues that they have on the offensive side. And I think the rookies on the offensive line will figure things out, and they've already started off pretty well. So that was when I think I went a little too hard on was the Cowboys going.
I just think the Browns might not be that good. I mean, I had the Browns as a team likely to decline before the year. I thought about them. The three things I thought about when you asked me the first question were Giants decline, I felt strongest about, Browns decline, I feel good about, and Chargers improving, which they had the most Jim Harbaugh victory I can imagine in week 1 against the Raiders. But I think the Browns, their defense looked good, but not great in week 1, and their offense looked just horrifically bad. And I think the Cowboys played a role in that, but I do think the Cowboys may not look quite as good against stiffer competition in the weeks to come.
Okay, let us know. You guys can let us know that are passing along in the comments what mistakes you've made in terms of your prediction. Chris Green says biggest regret is paying Daniel Jones. Yeah, well, that was 2 years ago, although I do think the Giants doubling down this offseason, Joe Shane didn't want to. I mean, he wanted to trade up for Drake May, but he didn't want to enough. I think if they had really just sold the farm for him, I think the Patriots could have listened. And they had a good offer, but it didn't happen. And I don't know if there's a chance Joe Shane doesn't make it to year 4, and then he has regrets about that.
Can I give you my unifying theory of the New York Giants and Joe Shane in the quarterback situation?
Please, yes.
I believe Brian Daboll and Joe Shane did not want Daniel Jones. I think when they got there, they were like, we'll give this guy a shot, but we're probably drafting a quarterback next year. And they had the same thing that happened with the Bills, where they had the unexpected year 1 playoff run with your, incumbent quarterback who you don't love. And Daniel Jones played well at the end of the year. His best football was the end of that season. It was his first healthy year as a pro. And my guess is that ownership, who had bought Daniel Jones for several years, waited for him to be good, were the driving forces in that Daniel Jones contract. Maybe Joe Shane didn't want to sign Saquon Barkley. I could understand.
I'm with you, but like, what's going to happen now? Like, they're going to lose their job, right? Because they should have listened to them. See about Saquon. They should have actually listened to that and just paid Saquon instead of paying. Who was that guard from the Packers? Oh, John Runyon. Instead of playing John Runyon 10.5, like go an extra $1 million for Saquon. If you can't coach up your guards to be better than that, then that's probably on you.
Greg, when you look at the draft and how nobody's good at drafting, you look at free agency and how good teams make bad decisions in free agency, good teams make bad trades. Sure. You're like, why are these guys getting paid so much? Well, one of the reasons GMs and coaches get paid so much is that sometimes they get fired because the owner strongly encouraged them to make bad decisions, and the owner is not the one who has to pay for it with their jobs. If you look at about the last 20 years of the Las Vegas / Oakland Raiders, that describes a lot of what's happened with the Raiders franchise. But we'll see. I mean, Daniel Jones, it can't be much worse than it was week 1. The Commanders, like you said, a lot of guys running free last week. If anyone's going to make Daniel Jones look good, it is the Washington Commanders in week 2.
Yeah, it's a trend with this Giants. There's a sneaky amount of reports of meddling. I mean, you had the whole Geno Smith, Eli Manning thing. You had really the last year or two of Eli Manning's career in different forms or fashion, which I think was definitely owner related. All right, finally we wrap with the prediction you wish you made.
That's a tough one. The prediction I wish I had made.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what I want to do.
I got a couple.
Go for it.
I mean, well, first, we did the over-under draft on this show, and I didn't want to take Pats over 4.5 because it just felt like Homer. I believed it could be. After 1 week, I'm like, well, they're already 20% there. The schedule's tough, but that was one of the tough parts of the schedule. A tough road game in Cincinnati. So there's one. I think they can get to 5. So I didn't want to be a homer. They were on my longer list when I listed the over-unders last week that I liked. So that was one. No one, literally no one, I don't believe, on NFL.com. They asked like 36 writers to who makes the playoffs. And I thought that 6-7 spot in the AFC was pretty up for grabs. I didn't have the Dolphins or Jets there. So to me, I thought the AFC East was going to be worse than people thought, and we'll see. But I was like, who makes it? And I ended up going Colts, Chargers, 6 and 7. But literally no one, and I think it was because of the preseason, out of 36 people picked the Steelers. And it's like, now already I'm like, maybe I should have taken the Steelers. Like, the Steelers will just find a way. And then finally, I had heard some buzz from people in Philadelphia about Quinyon Mitchell in training camp, but like, man, they really think they found someone. So a little Quinyon Mitchell, like defensive rookie of the year, having a great season. Even after 1 week, I'm feeling like that feels a little, that could have been a spicy pick that looks good.
A sprinkle, I think it's fair to say. I had the Patriots over 4.5. I had them as one of the most likely teams to improve in my column this year. Did not go boldly all the way to the playoffs. That is, I was not willing to go quite that far. But crazy, but stranger things. I mean, it would have been crazy to say the 3-13-1 Texans were going to win the AFC South last year, especially after they got blown out in week 1 by the Ravens. And yet that is exactly, Greg, what happened. Football is a very strange sport. I think they're going to be a lot better than people give them credit for. They're not going to be a playoff team, but I think a 7-win team this year in New England, and had that before the season. Prediction I wish I had made. I wish I'd had the Rams out of the playoffs. That was the one where for the longest time when I was doing my playoff article, I had them out and I kept the teams I was putting in. I didn't feel good about. I didn't feel good about the Falcons. I didn't feel good about Tampa. I didn't feel good about the Vikings. I had the Eagles out, so I couldn't pick them. And I felt like if I had to pick, a big team out, I was going to go with the Eagles. And that doesn't feel great right now, but we'll see. But the injuries were already bad before the season began. And now Puka Nacua is on the PUP list or on IR for 4 weeks. Joseph Noteboom's on IR for 4 weeks. Steve Avila's on IR for 4 weeks. They were already banged up on the offensive line before this. I mean, they are just absolutely battling injuries so far. So I feel like I would have had Rams out and maybe been a chicken and kept Eagles in, but maybe I should have just stuck with it, and maybe it just would be because the Rams they were in position to beat the Lions in Detroit if they get a stop at the end of that game. So maybe I'm being a little too harsh.
Yeah, that was one of those games they played so well. If you're the Rams, you would have loved to come away with the win, but it almost made me feel better about them. Then again, they feel like a month at least away from being anywhere close to whole on the offensive line, which is a pretty big deal. They're kind of built around their offensive line. As we wrap up, and thank you, Bill Barnwell,
of course.
One of the best in the entire business, the best writer in the game right now. Check him out at ESPN.com. As I tell him often, my ESPN Plus subscription, largely for Bill, a little bit for Zach Lowe too. I got to admit, I do love it.
A lot of people tell me Zach is very good. I
always throw that in. I like Zach.
If I can be like the 10% of your ESPN Plus behind.
No, you're number one. You're number one by far. Number 2 is actually the U.S. Open women's tennis tournament, Court 13. Like, you can get that on ESPN Plus, not to give them an ad, but it's just like, oh yeah, there's the Marta Kostyuk match that I want to watch. I can't actually find that anywhere else.
Individual low level or individual high level, but like modest court tennis feeds is what you're looking for.
Yeah,
ESPN
love that.
Plus does have that.
What an athlete she is. But yeah, he gets it done. Also, the Bill Barnwell show, of course, is great podcast, and he's on Around the Horn, and you see him on NFL Live. He is everywhere, and he's been great forever. Before we say goodbye, though, I will read you just some Mike McDaniel said after the game on Tua Tagovailoa's injury, just said he's just worried about his guy, not something you ever want to be part of. He'll get a proper evaluation, and then the Dolphins will make a decision on how to proceed with the injury. And look, he said every concussion's different, and you'll see, but there was good news that Tua was in good spirits in the locker room after the game. That alone makes it a different situation, at least than the last time that he had it. He was talking to the team, to his teammates in the locker room, and that made everyone feel better. And so we'll just have to see what the evaluation is. Obviously, we're wishing the best for him. He also says, look, a loss like this early in the season is a gut check, and they have to see how they respond. It's going to either be a good thing or a bad thing to lose a game like this, and obviously losing their quarterback makes it all the more painful. That's it for our Thursday night recap show. Hopefully the next one doesn't have any injuries to speak of. We will be back on Friday. Thanks again, Bill. Like I said, with a really quick pick show, we're going to try it separated from the rest of the show. I know not everyone's into the picks against the spread, so we'll do that separate on Friday. Then we'll be back for the Sunday Week 2 recap. Until then, so happy that football is back.